32,000 men showed up ready to fight, and God said, "Too many." Read that again. An army of 32,000 soldiers gathered to face a Midianite force. The Bible describes as being like locusts covering the valley, so vast that their camels could not be numbered. And the response from heaven was not good. Now we have a fighting chance. The response was, send most of them home. You have too many men for what I'm about to do. Too many, not too few. Too many. Because if 32,000 men defeated an army that size, everyone in Israel would know exactly what had happened. 32,000 soldiers won the battle. Human strength, human numbers, human strategy had prevailed. The story would be told that way. History would record it that way. And the lesson, the essential, irreducible lesson that this whole episode existed to teach, would be completely lost. So God began removing men from the equation. He didn't stop until he had taken 32,000 and left 300. 300 men against an army like a swarm of locusts, with no swords, no spears, no conventional military engagement at all, with torches, clay jars, and a trumpet. And what happened on that night in the valley of Jezreel? What 300 men accomplished with fire and noise, and the strategic deployment of chaos in the dead of night, against a force that outnumbered them by ratios that should have made the outcome laughable. That is one of the most astonishing military stories in the entire ancient world. And the most astonishing part is that the military victory was the least interesting thing about it. Stay with me. Because the story of Gideon begins not in the valley with 300 warriors, but in a wine press, with one very frightened man hiding from the people he was about to defeat. The land of Israel had been under Midianite oppression for 7 years. 7 years of a particular kind of misery that the book of Judges describes with unusual specificity, because it was not the misery of an occupying army maintaining a visible presence, the way the Romans would later garrison their forces in Israelite towns. The Midianites came differently. They came seasonally, sweeping in from the east with their camels and their tents and their livestock, flooding across the land of Israel like a plague at harvest time, taking everything that had been grown, leaving destruction behind when they left, and then returning the following year to do it again. For 7 years, the cycle had continued. Israel would plant, would tend the fields through the growing season, would watch the grain ripen and the grapes fill on the vines and the olive trees load with fruit. And then the Midianites would arrive, with the Amalekites and the people of the east alongside them, an alliance of nomadic raiders that the text says was too numerous to count. And they would take it all. The crops, the livestock, everything the land had produced. 7 harvests stripped away. 7 years of labor that produced nothing Israel could keep. The people were reduced to hiding in mountain clefts and caves, eking out what survival they could manage, while the valley floors belonged to their oppressors. And into this context, on a specific morning in a specific village, the angel of the Lord appeared to a man who was hiding. His name was Gideon. He was the son of Joash, from the tribe of Manasseh, from the clan of Abiezer, a lineage that would turn out to be significant, but not in a way that conveyed obvious status. He was threshing wheat inside a wine press. This detail matters enormously, and it is easy to read past it. Wheat is threshed on an open threshing floor, a flat, elevated, exposed surface where the wind can carry away the chaff when the grain is tossed in the air. The whole point of a threshing floor is the open air, the wind, the visibility. A winepress is underground, cut into rock, sheltered, hidden. You press grapes in a winepress, not thresh grain. Gideon was doing the work that normally happens in the open, in the dark, underground, as hidden as he could make himself, because he was afraid. Because doing it in the open meant the Midianites might see and take the grain before his family could benefit from it. He had moved the whole operation underground rather than risk losing what little he had managed to grow. This is the man the angel of the Lord greeted with words that must have landed with devastating irony in that particular setting. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Gideon's response to this greeting is one of the most relatable moments in the entire book of Judges, and one of the most theologically honest things anyone says to an angel in the entire Bible. He didn't believe it. Not the mighty warrior part, which, given that he was crouching in a winepress, seemed fairly obviously disconnected from his current situation. And not the Lord is with you part either, because if the Lord was with Israel, Gideon had some questions. "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, 'Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt?' But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of Midian." This is not the speech of a man who lacks intelligence or spiritual perception. This is the speech of a man who has been paying close attention to 7 years of suffering and has arrived at a theological conclusion that seems, from his vantage point, entirely reasonable. Whatever the God of Israel may have done in the past, in the present moment, he appears to be absent. The question Gideon asked, "If the Lord is with us, why has all this happened?" is a question that every generation of believers has asked in the middle of their worst seasons. It is the question behind every lament psalm. It is the question Job asks from the ash heap. It is the question that arrives with every diagnosis, every loss. Every 7-year season of watching everything you work for get stripped away. And the response Gideon received was the same response that tends to come to that question in Scripture. Not an explanation, but a commission. "Go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you the might of yours, not the might you are going to develop, not the might you will have after some period of spiritual preparation. This might, the might of a man threshing grain in a winepress, afraid of the people he was about to be sent to defeat. That was enough, or rather, it was not enough by itself, and both Gideon and God knew it. But the instruction came anyway. And then Gideon said the thing that makes him one of the most enduring characters in all of biblical narrative. "Please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." He didn't say he couldn't do it. He said he couldn't understand how he could do it, given who he was, given where he came from, given the specific combination of his family's minor status and his own position within that family. The least in the weakest clan, the bottom of the bottom tier. And the answer that came back was not a refutation of his assessment of himself. It was a redirection. "But I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man." Not, "You're wrong about being the least in the weakest clan," but, "I will be with you." The inadequacy of the human instrument was acknowledged and then set aside as irrelevant, because the operative factor in what was about to happen was not the instrument, but the one sending it. If this story is already speaking to you, if you recognize yourself in a man hiding in a wine press, being told he's a mighty warrior, subscribe right now. Because what happens next to Gideon is going to completely reframe your understanding of how God chooses people. Gideon received the commission. He received the reassurance. He received a sign. Fire consuming the food he had prepared, the angel disappearing with the flame. That confirmed the divine origin of this encounter. And he still wasn't sure. Not in the dramatic, faithless way that we might initially read it. Gideon's subsequent behavior, the famous episode with the fleece, is often used as evidence of his lack of faith, as if asking for a sign were inherently a sign of spiritual failure. But there is another way to read it, and it may be the more honest one. Gideon had just been told he was going to save Israel from the Midianites, with whom he was currently hiding in a wine press. This was not a small ask. This was an ask so large, so apparently disconnected from present reality, that asking for some confirmation seems less like faithlessness and more like the reasonable response of a person trying to determine whether they are actually hearing from God or constructing an elaborate story inside their own head. He put a fleece on the threshing floor. He asked God to make the fleece wet with dew while the ground around it stayed dry. In the morning, the fleece was soaking. The ground was dry. And then, and this is the part that shows something real about Gideon's character, he apologized for asking again and asked for the opposite: dry fleece, wet ground. In the morning, dry fleece, wet ground. Twice confirmed, in both possible directions. The anxiety of a man who needed to be very sure before he led 32,000 men into battle against an army like a plague of locusts is understandable on its face. And God honored it twice. What this episode actually reveals about Gideon is not primarily his doubt. It is his willingness to keep engaging with the process, his refusal to either charge forward on insufficient confirmation or retreat entirely because the ask was too large. He negotiated, he asked, he pushed back, and he kept moving. This is a man who is genuinely working through something in real time, not performing faith for an audience. The God who is sending him into battle appears to have no objection to that process. Gideon assembled the army. 32,000 men responded to the call, an impressive number, representing the kind of mobilization that suggests real momentum, real buy-in, real possibility. And then God said, "Too many. The people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand, lest Israel boast over me, saying, 'My own hand has saved me.'" The explicit reason is given. This is not a mysterious divine preference for small numbers as an aesthetic choice. This is a specific stated concern about the conclusion that would be drawn if the victory came with 32,000 men involved. The story Israel would tell about itself after a victory with 32,000 men would be the story of Israel's strength. And the story God wanted told was a different one. The first cut was simple. Whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home and hurry away from Mount Gilead. An invitation to leave for anyone who was afraid. 22,000 men left. 22,000. More than 2/3 of the army. This is not a small detail, This is a revelation about the state of Israel's fighting force, that when given explicit permission to leave based on fear, nearly 70% of the army walked away. The 32,000 who had shown up were not 32,000 soldiers in the modern sense of trained, willing combatants. They were 32,000 people who had answered a call, some of whom had been more or less brave about it. 10,000 remained, and God said, "Still too many." The second cut is stranger. Gideon was told to take the remaining 10,000 men down to the water and watch how they drank. Those who lapped water from their hands like a dog would be separated from those who knelt down to drink directly. 300 lapped from their hands. 9,700 knelt. The 300 were kept. Everyone else was sent home. The scholarship on this passage has debated endlessly what the water drinking test was actually measuring. Alertness, military readiness, some quality of character or vigilance that distinguished one group from the other. The honest answer is that the text does not clearly specify. But perhaps the more important question is not what the test measured, but what the process accomplished. It removed the final decision from Gideon's hands and placed it with God. Gideon did not choose his 300. He observed, reported, and received the selection that came back. The army he was going to fight with was not the army he would have assembled. It was the army God assembled by a method that made no obvious military sense, from a pool of men who had already been reduced to less than a third of its original size. 300 men, and then the most important instruction of all, send the rest of the men home. Not to a staging position, not to a reserve force. Home. The 10,000 who were sent away would play no role in what came next. This was going to be 300, or it was going to be nothing. Gideon was afraid. God knew this. The text tells us God knew this because the night before the battle, before Gideon had assembled his 300 into position, God told him to do something that was either the strangest reconnaissance mission in military history or a profoundly compassionate act of pastoral care for a terrified leader. Arise, go down against the camp, for I have given it into your hand. But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah your servant, and you shall hear what they say. And afterward your hands shall be strengthened to go down against the camp. Go eavesdrop on the enemy camp, not to gather intelligence about their positions, or their weapons, or their numbers, but because you will hear something there that will help you be less afraid. Gideon went. With his servant Purah, in the dark, they crept to the edge of the Midianite camp. The edge of the vast army that the text describes as covering the valley floor like locusts, their camels without number. And they arrived at the exact right moment, at the exact right place, to overhear a conversation between two Midianite soldiers. One of them had just had a dream. A loaf of barley bread had tumbled into the Midianite camp and struck the tent so hard that the tent collapsed, turned upside down, and fell flat. And the other soldier, hearing this, interpreted it immediately. This is no other than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given into his hand Midian and all the camp inside the enemy camp. In a dream, one of their own soldiers had dreamed. In the interpretation that another of their soldiers offered without hesitation, God had placed in the subconscious imagination of a Midianite in the camp of the people Gideon was supposed to defeat, a dream that told exactly the story Gideon needed to hear. You are not going in blind. They already know what's coming. The fear of you is already there. And the text tells us what happened when Gideon heard this. He worshiped. Right there, at the edge of the enemy camp, in the dark, with his servant beside him. He bowed down and worshiped. And then he went back to his 300 and said, "Arise, for the Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hand." The worship came before the victory. The certainty came before the battle. And the certainty came not from Gideon's own assessment of the situation, but from a dream he had no power to arrange, and an interpretation he had no power to predict. Comment right now. Have you ever received confirmation from a completely unexpected source at exactly the moment you needed it? A dream, a conversation, something you overheard? Tell us, because what happens next in this story is unlike anything else in the entire Bible. 300 men, no swords in their hands for this mission, no spears, no conventional military formation. Each man received a trumpet, an empty clay jar, and a torch. The torch concealed inside the jar so its light would not be visible until the moment it needed to be. And Gideon divided them into 3 companies, 100, 100, 100, positioned around 3 sides of the camp. And he gave them their instructions and told them to watch him and do what he did. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then blow the trumpets also on every side of all the camp, and shout, "For the Lord and for Gideon." The plan depended entirely on surprise, on timing, on the specific effect that terror has on large groups of people in the dark when they cannot see where an attack is coming from or how large it is. The middle watch of the night, the darkest hours when sleep is deepest, and the men on watch have been on for hours already, when alertness has softened and the mind begins to drift toward the dawn that is still hours away. Gideon's 300 surrounded the camp, and then, simultaneously, all at once, from 3 directions at once, every man blew his trumpet. Every man broke the clay jar he was carrying, exposing the torch inside, holding it in his left hand and the trumpet in his right. And 300 voices shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon!" The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the Midianites. The sound of 300 trumpets. In the ancient world, a trumpet signaled not a herald, but a military unit, which meant that 300 trumpets suggested 300 military units, meaning the camp was being attacked by a force potentially numbering in the tens of thousands from 3 sides simultaneously in the dark. The torches, appearing suddenly all around the camp's perimeter, confirmed the surrounding. And then they kept blowing. They did not charge. They did not rush the camp with weapons drawn. They stood their positions and kept blowing and shouting and holding the light. And the Midianite camp did what panicked armies have always done when they believe they are surrounded by a superior force in the dark. They turned on each other. The Lord set every man's sword against his comrade and against all the army. The Midianites were defeated not by Israelite swords, but by their own. Not by a charge, but by a shout. Not by military superiority, but by the specific surgical application of fear and chaos in the exact moment and configuration that would do the most damage. And when they fled, when the camp broke and ran for the fords of the Jordan, Gideon summoned the tribe of Ephraim to cut off their escape, and the pursuit that followed completed the rout. The army like locusts, the camels without number, the 7-year oppression. all of it ended in a night, with torches and clay jars and trumpets and 300 men who stood their ground and made noise and let God do the rest.
Yeah.
300 men won that battle, but the victory did not belong to 300 men. This is the point that the entire structure of the story, the progressive reduction, the explicit stated reason for the reduction, the improbable weapons, the enemy's own swords doing the killing. The entire structure of the story is designed to make this point impossible to miss. 32,000 men would have won this battle with Israel's strength. The outcome might have been the same, but the story told afterward would have been different. The glory, in the ancient sense of the word, the weight of honor and recognition, would have settled in a different place. Israel would have told the story of its army, its warriors, its military capability. 300 men with torches and clay jars and trumpets in the middle of the night could not have won this battle with human strength. The math is simply too lopsided. And yet they did win it. And Israel, telling that story, could not attribute it to their own numbers, or their own weapons, or their own military genius. The credit had to go somewhere else. This is the architecture of the whole episode. God deliberately engineered a situation in which the outcome was inexplicable by any ordinary metric, so that the only available explanation was the right one. This is not a unique strategy in Scripture. It is a recurring one. Moses and an outnumbered Israel at the Red Sea, with Pharaoh's army closing from behind. David with a sling against a 9-foot armored warrior. The disciples in Acts, preaching in a language they had not learned to crowds who heard them in their own tongues. Again and again, the pattern. The resource available appears insufficient by every human calculation, and the outcome that follows can only be explained by the factor that was not visible in the original equation. This pattern is not coincidental. It is instructional. It is the consistent testimony of a God who appears to prefer situations in which credit cannot easily be misdirected. 300 in torches and jars and trumpets, and a victory that could not be attributed to 300. Wow. The story of Gideon does not end with the victory, and the part that comes after the victory is as important as the battle itself, because it tells us something honest about what happens to people who are used by God for something extraordinary. Gideon did things after the victory that were less admirable than the night of the torches and the clay jars. He exacted vengeance on the towns that had refused to help his army during the pursuit. He made an ephod, a priestly garment or some kind of gold object, from the plunder, and the text tells us it became a snare to him and to his household, as people began to treat it as an object of worship. He had many wives and 70 sons. And after Gideon died, the son born to him by a concubine, a man named Abimelech, killed his brothers in a bid for power, bringing disaster on the family and the region that Gideon had delivered. The man who had been hiding in a winepress, who had doubted, who had asked for confirmation twice, who had worshipped at the edge of the enemy camp before the battle, that man's legacy after the victory was complicated, genuinely, honestly complicated. This is part of what makes Gideon's story so much more interesting and so much more human than a simple triumph narrative. He is in the Hebrews 11 list of the faithful. And he is also a man whose later years show the specific ways that power, wealth, and success can complicate the character of someone who was genuinely faithful in the hour of crisis. The crisis brought out something true and essential in Gideon. The aftermath revealed other things, also true and essential, that were less admirable. This is not an argument against Gideon. It is an argument for honesty about what the biblical narrative actually shows us. People who are used by God in extraordinary ways are still people. The victory at Jezreel does not complete Gideon or make him permanently different. He remains the man who was hiding in the winepress, now with military glory added to his biography. And the combination of his faithful crisis moment and his complicated post-victory life makes him more believable, not less. He was genuinely faithful when it counted. He was genuinely flawed in the years that followed. Both are true, and both matter. The 300 men who stayed are never named. We know nothing about them individually. No one recorded which men lapped from their hands and which ones knelt. No family trees connect any particular warrior to the 300. No later tradition identifies any of them by name as a veteran of this specific battle in the way that other biblical warriors are sometimes remembered. They are simply the 300. The ones who were selected by a method no one would have designed, kept by a process that eliminated the other 9,700, and sent into the night with torches and clay jars and trumpets to face an army like locusts. And they went. This is worth sitting with. Because whatever else could be said about these 300 men, whatever fears they had, whatever doubts, whatever silent calculations they were running as Gideon divided them into 3 groups and distributed the improbable weapons, they went. They took their positions in the dark around the enemy camp. They waited for the signal. And when it came, they blew and they broke and they shouted and they held the light. They held the light! This is what the 300 actually did in tactical terms. They stood their ground around the perimeter of the camp, and they held their torches up and they made noise. And they trusted that what they could not accomplish with weapons would be accomplished by the chaos their noise and light created. They were not the force that defeated the Midianites. They were the instrument that set the defeat in motion. The torch, not the sword. There is something important in this, because the 300 could not have told you, standing at the edge of that camp in the middle of the night, exactly how this was going to work. They knew the plan: blow the trumpets, break the jars, hold the torches, shout. They did not know, could not have known, that the result would be the Midianites turning their swords on each other. They trusted that doing their part in the way they had been instructed, in the moment they had been told to do it, would be sufficient. They held their light up and waited to see what the light would do.
Yeah.
Gideon began in a wine press, hiding, threshing grain underground because above ground was too dangerous, doing the work of the open air in the dark, closed-off work of the underground. He ended the night in a valley cleared of the army that had oppressed his people for 7 years. The distance between those 2 locations, the winepress and the valley, was not traveled by becoming a different person. Gideon did not become fearless. He asked for confirmation twice. He crept to the edge of the enemy camp under cover of darkness because God knew he needed to hear the dream before he could move forward. He was afraid at multiple points in this story, and the text does not present that fear as disqualifying him from what he was called to do. He traveled the distance from the winepress to the valley as exactly the man he was, afraid and willing, doubtful and obedient, the weakest clan, the least in his father's house, holding a torch in the dark outside the camp of an army like locusts. And the army like locusts ran. The story that got told in Israel after that night was not the story of 300 mighty warriors. It was not a story that could be told that way, because 300 men with torches and clay jars and trumpets do not defeat armies like locusts through their own strength. The story had only one possible telling. God did this with 300, with torches, in the middle of the night, so that no one in Israel could say anything other than that. This is what you need to take from the story of Gideon and his 300. Not that God prefers small numbers as a kind of aesthetic preference. Not that military strategy is irrelevant or that preparation doesn't matter, but that when God is the operative factor in an outcome, He tends to arrange the circumstances in such a way that the human contribution, however real, however costly, however faithfully offered, cannot serve as the primary explanation for what happened. The 300 held their torches. The outcome came from somewhere else, and the story got told correctly. What is the wine press you're hiding in right now? What work are you doing underground that was meant to be done in the open? What army is camped in the valley below the thing you were born to address? The question the angel asked in that wine press has not expired. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior, not the warrior you will be someday, the one you already are. Afraid, uncertain, the weakest in the weakest clan, holding a torch that seems too small for the darkness in front of you. Blow your trumpet, break your jar, hold up the light, and watch what happens in the camp below. If this story moved you today, if you recognized yourself in Gideon, hiding in the wine press, and being called mighty anyway, please share this video with one person who needs to hear that their inadequacy is not disqualifying. Leave a comment below. Tell us your wine press, the place where you've been doing the work of the open air, in the underground, out of fear. Tell us if you've heard the call to come out. Comment 300. If you're willing to show up with what you have, even when what you have seems impossibly small for what's in front of you, subscribe. Because every story in this series is about ordinary people who were asked to do impossible things with inadequate resources, and what happened when they said yes. The valley is there. Blow the trumpet.